the jet engine. Although the man who invented the jet engine was actually a Russian, and he's dead. He was killed by a man named Joseph Stalin. Well, Stalin's purges, anyway. 1920s and 30s. The man who came up with it prior to World War I. Imagine that. And he was a Russian. Imagine that. Russia's not popular right now. America's not popular right now. Of course, neither one of these countries had a hand in making the first jet engine, did they? Nope. Russia blew its chance by killing its geniuses. Anybody more intelligent than Stalin, Stalin had massacred or imprisoned. The jet engine is given credit to two different men, very, very different men. One of them being Frank Whittle of the United Kingdom. What did Frank Whittle do? He came up with the centrifugal compressor. And that's what all jet engines have their life dedicated to, the centrifugal compressor. Hans von Ohain. This man is co-credited with inventing the jet engine. Both of these men worked on their engine designs before World War II. The first one to come up with the concept was Frank Whittle. And his patents were actually put into a magazine that would have been read by most airplane enthusiasts of the day, including Hans von Ohain. Hans von Ohain thought he had a better way to do it than the centrifugal compressor. Is there a better way than the centrifugal compressor? Depends on what you're doing. The Germans in World War II went with Hans von Ohain's design. Hans von Ohain's design used the axial compressor. That means that there's a center shaft and that there's a bunch of compressor blades and a bunch of sets of those compressor blades, each one getting just a little bit smaller than the one ahead of it. What that allows it to do is slowly compress the air. I say slowly, it's quite relative actually. It's not thrown out like a centrifugal compressor. In a centrifugal compressor, you got a small hole. The air goes into the small hole. This thing about this big around, and you got these tines that come off of it. And as it spins through that little hole that it's sucking the air into, it's throwing it to the edges. Kind of like taking a bucket. You put some water in the bottom of it, and then you swing it around really fast. You won't lose any of the water. All of the water is thrown to the outside edge. Basically, it pushes to the bottom of the bucket. Now, Russia, when they took over the parts of Germany they took over, the Russians basically consider the Germans part of the West. The Americans consider the Germans part of the East. Really, no German wanted to be a part of the East. That was just bad news all around, and everyone knew it. Hans von Ohain, what do we hear about him after World War II? Nothing. Nobody gives two shits about him. Frank Whittle was actively involved in a lot of different projects. On up to the Fuga Magister, which you might not imagine is one of his designs, especially since it's a French engine that's built for helicopters that runs the thing. Now, America's first purpose-built jet engine was the Westinghouse 9.5, because it had a 9.5-inch if you looked at it from the front, it had a 9.5-inch diameter. And it was used for testing drone missiles and drone rockets. Why did they put a jet engine on a rocket? They're not the same thing. They're not the same concept. Well, I suppose you'll have to ask them. Our first guided missile program needed those 9.5s in order to function. Now we've got stuff that is designed by a company called Turbomeca. They are attached to a global company called Sabre. Sabre happens to run about 30 to 50% of the jail and prison computers. Same exact company. They're known now for having their engines in military training jet craft as well as helicopters around the whole world. The Westinghouse 9.5, the next one in the series, was the J31 by General Electric. This is the first mass-produced jet engine created by the United States. It was also known as the Super 31. Yeah. Well, later iterations of it, we got the J35, and then later on the J47. The General Electric J47 series of engines is based off of the, well, we want to call it the Nazi design, but really, Hans von Ohain himself was never, ever a Nazi. He was interested in the airplane, but he got to be a fall guy for it, whereas one of his competitors ended up getting praise for not being a Nazi sympathizer. Lots of dynamics, internal politics, and other assorted BS. The General Electric J31 engine was the first mass-produced, but the J47 was the first one to get, what would you call that? Military approval. So the f86 Sabre and the MiG-15, believe it or not, they're not that much different. There are a lot of things that are different about them. Their overall shape, though, it would be difficult for you to tell the difference between an f86 Sabre and a MiG-15 if one of them crossed your path 10 miles ahead. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. As fast as you're going, though, you'll get close enough to tell the difference soon. Both of them suck the air in from the front of the nose. Both of them had it so that the airflow was divided around the cockpit. Both of them were rear ejection. However, that would be Russia, used a Western engine designed by Frank Whittle. The Rolls-Royce Nene 2, or the Rolls-Royce Nene. A variant of that also went into the Gloucester Meteor, as well as the Vampire, which was one of Great Britain's answers to the jet engine, or to jet aircraft in general. America took a commanding lead right from the very start, and they kept that lead and have maintained that lead to this day. The Russians lead in liquid rocket technology. Matter of fact, the stuff that they were able to do in the 1940s and 1950s, we still can't duplicate today. We cannot duplicate today. Just like the Type 21. This is a torpedo used by Japan. Sorry, not the Type 21. The 21-inch oxygen torpedo. Type 21 Long Lance. I believe it's 21. There's also the Type 14, and it's similar to the Long Lance, but it's the submarine version, or the torpedo plane version, or the, what else was it used on? Some surface ships. They were oxygen fed, but it was fed by liquid oxygen. That's what made them so fast. That's also what made it so that the British gave up on the project. That's right, the British were trying it first. They tried it in World War I, blew up a submarine. They tried it in World War II, blew up another submarine. Liquid oxygen. World War I, it was liquid oxygen in their torpedo, and in World War II, it was, what is it, calcium permanganate? No. Well, liquid hydrogen peroxide. An 80% concentration or better, as soon as it comes in contact with metal, primarily something like aluminum, it expands faster than steam. And steam expands quite rapidly. I know, I've built rocket engines, literal rocket engines, that run primarily on steam. Now, on the inside, the jet engine. It's called a pulse jet. The problem with the whole pulse jet is that it gets too hot. They'll burn themselves to pieces quick. The problem with the steam engine is that they have closed circuit systems, and it'll build up too much pressure and possibly explode. So by making it so that it's not a closed system, so that when the water is injected into the machine, it goes against an internal pipe that is the pulse jet, and there's an external pipe that's your sleeve. In between the internal and the external pipe is where the water goes, and the water cools down the pipe so that it doesn't end up burning itself to pieces. That heat exchange turns that water instantaneously into steam, and the steam gets propelled out the back. The majority of your power from that comes from the steam. Two very simple solutions, two very different engines, and by combining the two together, you end up with an efficient engine. Now, the Heron's steam ball. This is the very first actual jet engine, but what did they use it for? That very easily could have run chariots without horses. Just that simple concept there. And they understood planetary gears back then. Planetary gears are not something new. If you don't know what a planetary gear is, you should look it up. It's a mechanical piece. Several mechanical pieces. It's amazing that the Eastern engine, this is what an axial flow compressor is. That's considered an Eastern engine. The Western jet engine is considered the centrifugal flow. That'd be the Rolls-Royce Nenes. Klimov is the company that ended up making the Russian variant of the Nene. Klimov also makes a version of another engine that Rolls-Royce now holds the patent to. The Rolls-Royce 250, which was originally an American company called Allison 350. Those jet engines were actually put into a lot of different helicopters. Everything from the f86 Cayuse in Vietnam, all the way on up to the current models of the Jet Ranger helicopter. When the MiG-15 and the F86 Sabre went to battle, it's not the part I focus on, is it? It's their performance. What were they capable of? What did they do? And what is the history behind those machines? It's a history of warfare. It's a history of cruelty and stupidity and ignorance. The Rolls-Royce Nene, the Western engine, is what the Easterns, the Russians in specific, decided to put in their first purpose-built jet aircraft, and their second and their third. But their first jet engines that they produced themselves were actually copies of the Junkers Umo 004 engines, Nazi Germany's engines, derived from Hans von Ohain's engines. The Western powers, the primary Western powers, there was only one, the United States. That was it. That was the only Western power to survive intact in World War II. The only one. And we used the Eastern engine. So when it comes to East versus West, the West chose the Eastern engine, the Easterns chose the Western engine. The Germans had a better design because they had more money to throw into it. It wasn't like Frank Whittle's design, where it was primarily Frank Whittle and a few people helping with the patent technology. With Frank Whittle, he didn't have any government support, whereas Hans von Ohain not only had government support, he also had the support of the entire aircraft industry. Any of you know anything about how the Germans kept up their training prior to World War II, or prior to making their own military? Well, they had a lot of people that were involved in everything from submarines to aircraft. A lot of times they would use it as civilian technologies or by companies in other countries, such as the Dutch. The Dutch are 100% responsible for the Type 7 submarine. Without that port, the Germans wouldn't have been able to do that. Germany, at the time that Adolf Hitler took over, well, prior to that, it was the Weimar Republic. We had a lot of issues with the Weimar Republic. We also had a lot of issues like we did after Desert Storm, where we have peacekeeping missions, right? We're sending people there that are supposed to take a look at things, but they have to telegraph that they're showing up 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, which allows a cleanup. As we found out in Iraq, there were no weapons of mass destruction. None. That was just an excuse. Just like Adolf Hitler, when he had SS men show up at a radio station and claim that it was a Polish attack. Yeah, smart fellers. When the guys at the top decide they want something, they take it. If you don't agree with them, they'll just lie to you over and over and over again, and the idiots who believe them will hate you for disagreeing. Oh, these are professionals. These are professional con artists is what they are. Meanwhile, we can see how China is major industrializing. See, China owed us a lot of money from World War II. But after World War II, the government that we sided with is not the government that won. And that kind of put us in a hard spot, because we didn't make those people pay us back. It was a different government. That different government said, no, we're not making deals with you. If we're going to make deals, we're starting fresh. You helped our enemies, not us. Now we got a situation where China said, hey, you owe us all this money from all this Chinese stuff that you're sanctioning and embargoing. But still, it all hits the market here in the United States, doesn't it? No matter how many embargoes the United States has placed on China, you have always been able to buy Chinese goods in the United States. There has never been a time in my life when I couldn't go to a store and find something made in China. Ever. Regardless of sanctions, regardless of embargoes, regardless of whining. Then, in the early 2000s, China came through and said, hey, we can cancel some of this debt by you giving us all of your steel, all of your iron, all your ferrous metals. And sure enough, we did. We also gave them a lot of brass and a lot of aluminum. The strapping industry in the early 2000s to the mid 2000s was a good industry. Late 90s even, good industry. But once China got its fill, it was done. And the market dropped out, and a lot of people lost their companies because the market dropped out. Now China is able to produce things in greater quantity than America ever could. And before you start going, oh, well, American stuff is better than everybody else's. It's made better than everybody else's. Look at the Sherman. Yeah, do look at the Sherman. The Sherman was a piece of shit. It was a steaming pile of shit. There were very few German weapons that would not penetrate a Sherman tank through the frontal armor. Very few. You have to stick to small arms in order to talk about stuff that won't go through a Sherman. The Sherman, though, was modular, just like the German jet Me-262. Modular. If you get an Me-262 and one of them gets the whole front end of it shot up and one of them gets the whole back end of it shot up, you can take the back end off of one and the front end off the other and put them both together and you got yourself a new plane. With a Sherman tank, you get a German 88 round through your transmission. Completely destroys your transmission. You got another one. Takes a German 75. Goes completely through the turret, burns everything out, but you know what? Transmission's still good. You can unbolt the transmission off of one Sherman and bolt it onto another. Parts were not interchangeable in the Russian military. 2 T-34 tanks built in the same factory could have varying qualities. Also, 2 T-34 tanks from different factories could be assembled in a completely different way. The side armor could be cut and welded in a different way. But the thing is, the parts were not interchangeable. With the Germans, they had to send their tanks all the way back to the factory for repair. The Russians, when their tank broke down, fuck it, just leave it there. With the Americans, when a tank breaks down, shit, we got 6 tanks broken down. I'm sure we can service the parts from them well enough to get at least 2 of them running. Maybe even 3. But America and Russia both produced a lot more tanks than the Germans did. Both of them. Whether it was the T-34 or the American Sherman, didn't make any difference. The fact is that they were there. China's got the same thing going on. Who had superior vehicles in World War II? Some people might say it's the Germans, but I disagree because of the modular design of the Sherman. Did German tanks outrank and outweigh and outperform Russian tanks? Yes. With the exception of downtime. When it comes to downtime with a tank, if it was Russian and it was smashed to shit, it wasn't worth the downtime to try to take it back to the factory. Just leave it. No downtime. It's just written off as a total loss. For the Germans, it's a lot of downtime. You have to get a vehicle out there to drag your fucking tank to a rail yard where you can hopefully get it onto the train, and hopefully it can make it to its destination without going through a tunnel that's too skinny. Some of those tanks were just way too big. When they were hit, you had to just leave them there. When it comes to the f86 Sabre and the MiG-15, we had a lot of working knowledge from World War II to work with, but we also had a new technology we were playing with. And that's what it comes down to our governments. A place to test their toys and somebody else to take the risk. Whether it's a MiG-15 or a f86 Sabre, they were built for the same thing, destroying the other man. No matter how much I like the technology, the fact is that this is all warfare. Stuff that is designed for war isn't all that great in the civilian market. Imagine driving a Sherman tank to work. It'd be cool, wouldn't it? Unless you're the person who has to repair the roads. Oh wait, but you gotta feed your family, so we've created a job there by tearing up the roads with a Sherman tank. When it comes to German engineering, it's German over-engineering. The guns were good. Everything else was over-engineered. For American stuff, we just didn't want to put good guns on anything. For what the Sherman was designed for, it was actually designed for a war that we never fought. And we're never going to. We basically went in there with the wrong tool for the job, but luckily we had a whole bunch of tools for the job. Kind of like the difference between having 5,000 men with shovels or one guy with an excavator. Yeah, those 5,000 men with shovels, just because there's 5,000 of them with shovels, are going to be able to dig a trench longer and deeper, faster. Because there's 5,000 of them. Kind of the same thing with the Sherman. And the same thing we get to deal with the Chinese. If they build crap, but they build it in abundance, kind of like with the Russians, it don't matter if you take out 10 T-34s. You got 20 more coming up. Can you outproduce the Russians? Can you outproduce the Chinese? Maybe before you gave them all those raw materials. And they're not raw materials, are they? No, this is actual steel, actual iron, already forged, already pressed. They don't even have to melt out the impurities. They don't have to blast millions of tons of rock in order to get enough steel to make a building. They've already got enough. We sent it to them. Kind of like we gave the Russians the designs for the Rolls-Royce Nene. Kind of like we took the designs for the Junkers Umo 004 and the BMW 003.